So friends, the gospel for this All Saints Sunday is from Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 12. So this is the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. We actually had this in the lectionary cycle last spring. So this lengthy sermon that Jesus preaches to his disciples and some other followers. And the sermon begins with these beatitudes, these blessings. What I usually say when I preach on them is that it's sort of like, oh, the happiness of those is what Jesus is saying. I think in this context for All Saints Day, the reason this is picked for this day is because the church is sort of saying, this is what a saint looks like. A saint looks like the person in these Beatitudes. These are the things that we sort of strive for on our way to becoming more and more like Christ. So with that, I invite you to listen for God's word speaking to you. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Friends, this is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So let me tell you about a saint of the church that I encountered in one of the churches I served. Her name was Sarah Ann Beatty. Not Sarah, Sarah Ann. And probably 36 times I saw her introduce herself as Sarah Ann. Someone would say, "Nice to meet you, Sarah," and she'd say, "No, it's Sarah Ann." Sarah Ann was her name. So she was a member of Southampton Presbyterian Church in South City, and I served there for about 3 years as a supply pastor. So when I came to that Southampton church, there were only about 15 people coming to church on Sunday morning, and Sarah Ann was one of those remaining members, and she was almost single-handedly the mission and the congregational care arm of this church. So every time there was the slightest thing to be celebrated, she insisted on bringing a full sheet cake to church. And every time that happened, she would call me and say, "I can get the cake to church, but I can't get it inside. So can you bring it inside?" So this was the deal. She walked with a cane, and at that with really great difficulty. So somehow she could get to the supermarket, get this sheet cake in a shopping cart, get it into her car, and drive it to church, but the church from there was all stairs, and she couldn't get it up there. So she made really a huge effort to get these cakes to church, but not because like a lot of church folks at a church like that would have been like, "Well, that's just the way we've always done it, and so I'm going to stubbornly keep doing it." It really was that she thought this was the best way to honor people, and so she just did. Sarah Ann oversaw this large storage room in the basement of the church, and if you looked in that storage room, like the church was crumbling, if you looked in there, you would have said, "Oh my God, what is all this garbage?" But what she was doing was collecting items for people in need all year long. And though you would never be able to make sense of it, she knew where everything was. And around Christmas, she would start collecting and wrapping gifts in that space for several families that she'd come to know over the years. And one year she asked me to help her deliver those Christmas gifts. And we went to all these random places in South St. Louis that I'd never been to before, visiting some really desperate situations, like people she had just collected over the years. And she knew each family member by name and had gifts for them all. So this church at the time had way more money than it had members, and Sarah Ann was on the session, and at almost every session meeting, she, as an elder of the church, was urging us to somehow spend that money on people in need. Almost every meeting, she had some need we were going to meet. So one day at church, she asked me if I was going to be in town on a Monday that was about 3 months in the future. And I was completely puzzled by this. And she said that she was going to have surgery on her knee, and she wanted to schedule it when I was going to be in town. And so the backstory was this: she had had a surgery a few years before, and the pastor at the time didn't visit her when she was in the hospital. Now, this really isn't that uncommon, especially these days. You often don't know if people want to visit you or not. And I've gone to visit people, I walked in the room, and it's clear they didn't want me there, you know? So some people are more private, so it's not that uncommon. But she wanted to be sure that this didn't happen again. She wanted me to be at that hospital and pray with her the moment before she was wheeled back for surgery. And here's the thing about this: it's really refreshing to have people be that straightforward about what they want and need. There's no guesswork involved, right? So a lot of people I've known in churches over the years would have used this as an opportunity to test the new pastor, you know, to see if they're really good, to see if they really care. And if the pastor failed the test, that would be shared with everyone, and this resentment would kind of be nurtured. But really that wasn't the case with Sarah Ann. There wasn't a hint of that. She just wanted to be sure that I knew that she wanted me to be there. And so I met her there at Barnes early in the morning for her surgery, and the first thing she did was handed me an envelope with money in it to pay for my parking. I've never had anybody do that before. And then her son was there, and she said, after I'm wheeled back, he's going to take you to the cafeteria for breakfast, because I know you miss breakfast getting here that early. Like, again, no one had ever done that. So she wanted what she wanted, but she was going to make that happen. So Sarah Ann actually died right as I was getting started here at First Pres. And at her funeral, which wasn't really a funeral, it was just people telling stories about her, we just heard stories like this over and over and over again of her generosity, her kindness, her seemingly tireless work for others. So, speaking of funerals, do you ever think about what people are going to say about you at your funeral? It's funny, I never used to do that, but now I kind of do. I think maybe as you get older, you know, you kind of think, what are people going to say? So let me say this: if you want people to say nice things about you, now is the time to start laying that foundation, right? Don't wait. So Deb and I have a friend in town who recently was telling about a funeral she attended for a colleague in town, a professor at some local university. And she said at the funeral, some of his really distinguished academic achievements were mentioned, and she listed some of those. And she also mentioned that they said he was very kind to stray cats. All his life, he was kind to stray cats. And here's the funny thing: I don't remember what any of those academic achievements were that she mentioned when she was telling us about this. I remember that this guy was kind to stray cats. And I think that's how it often is when we're trying to sum up a person's life. So things like they made a lot of money, or they published a lot of books, or they won a bunch of awards, always seems to sort of pale in comparison to simple acts of kindness and love. So think about that. If you were at a funeral and they said, he had the nicest cars. Well, okay, but what if it's, she really loved her children and grandchildren and always was there for them. We kind of know in our hearts, at some deep level of our souls, that things like kindness and love really matter because they're eternal. They're what, like St. Paul calls the fruits of the Spirit. And things like achievements and possessions and wealth, though all that's fine, we sort of know that's all temporary and it's going to fade away. So if you really want people to say nice things to you at your funeral, I will if it happens. I hope it doesn't happen, but I will anyway. But if you really want that, a good place to focus your attention, again, is on what Paul calls the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, and so on. These eternal things. So both of our scriptures today are assigned texts for All Saints' Day. And what they both seem to be saying is this, that if you want to be a saint, all you have to do is be like Jesus. That's it. That's all you have to do. A pretty high bar. So you may have noticed this about the Beatitudes. So they start out in this really inviting way, and then they end in this kind of shocking way. So what I mean is this, they begin like this: blessed are the poor in spirit, and the meek, and the merciful, and the pure in heart, and the peacemakers. It sounds a lot like the fruit of the Spirit. But then they end with this: blessed are you when people revile you, when people persecute you, when they utter all sorts of evil against you falsely. And as I was looking at those Beatitudes again this week, I was like, oh, these are all about Jesus, right? All of those blessedness, that's how Jesus lived his life. And yet, he was also rejected and reviled for living that way. And you might ask, why would anyone despise someone who lived out these Beatitudes, right? Why would anyone ever despise a peacemaker? But just say that you're for peace in Gaza right now, and you'll have all kinds of people despising you and want to hang you up because you are working for peace. So the Beatitudes really are just sort of mapping out who Jesus was. So in short, blessed are you when you become fully like Jesus. And there are hints of the exact same thing in the passage Roger read for us from 1 John. So there John assures us that we are children of God, which is a nice thing to be children of God. The Beatitudes say the same thing. But then the world doesn't know us because they didn't know and recognize Jesus Christ. Again, somehow the world rejects Jesus. But then this assurance, we're not sure how all of this is going to end. But know this, we're sure of this, in the end, we will all become like Jesus Christ. That's kind of amazing. I have to say, in church, I was never taught that as a kid. Jesus was very far off, kind of looking down from heaven, maybe judging me. But in this theology of John, we are all going to become like Jesus Christ. So a saint is not someone who believes in Jesus. A saint is not someone who says, oh, Jesus died for my sins. A saint is someone who becomes like Jesus. So the message of both of these texts really is something like this, that most people get so caught up in the temporary and worldly things that they miss or misunderstand or even fear or hate the things that really matter. Saints, on the other hand, manage in all of this to be more and more like Jesus, to be ruled by the eternal. And again, that means being a saint seems like a pretty high bar. So here's really the truth. None of us are saints all the time. Even St. Paul confessed this in one of his letters to the church at Rome. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not do is what I do. That's St. Paul, okay? He says it again. I don't do the good that I want, but the evil I do not want is what I end up doing. So none of us are saints all the time. But from time to time, we can be saints. We can be free from the cares of the world. We can be set free to love another person without condition. We can become like Jesus Christ. So Eckhart Tolle says something like, all it takes is one moment of awareness. So for instance, really seeing the wind in the trees and how beautiful that can be. Really feeling the sun on your face. Really experiencing love for another. All it takes is one conscious breath to become enlightened. And if we can manage one conscious breath, then we maybe can manage another. So you may not be a saint all day long, but you can be a saint for a moment. And with a little awareness and a little practice, we can string those moments together and become more and more like Christ. So I've shared this with you before. A few years ago, I was visiting one of really my dearest colleagues, and she was in the hospital. She had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and our conversation turned to death. So 2 pastors in the hospital talking about death. But it wasn't in a fearful or depressing way. It actually was in this incredibly hopeful way. So she told me this. She said when she was still a pastor, she was visiting with a woman in her church whose husband had recently died. And the woman asked her about her husband, so where is he now? Will I ever see him again? Where is he? And she said the wisest thing, and I love this about her. She said the wisest thing to that woman, but she also said to me, I don't have any idea where this came from. I never thought this before I was meeting with this woman. I think it just came from the Holy Spirit. But this is what I said to her. I said, those parts of your husband's personality and person that were not of God, that you found difficult to live with, that you did not like, that disappointed you, that let you down, those parts of him are gone now forever. You don't have to worry about them. You don't have to hold on to them. You are free to forgive them and forget them and to let them go. But those part of his personality and person that were a part of God, those parts that you respected and admired and adored, those places where you were truly connected in love and in joy and in kindness and in gentleness, those parts are eternal and can never be taken away, and you will meet that again one day. So, if that is true, and I really do believe that something like that is true, then we who are on this side of the grave do have some idea about things eternal, about what matters not just in the next life, but in this one. So, what parts of your personality and person are a part of God? Where is it that you connect with others and with this world in love, in joy, in kindness, in mercy, in generosity? So be aware of that side of yourself. It's in all of us. Be aware of that side of yourself. Treat it like a dimly burning wick that you're not going to let go out. Give that side of yourself at least as much of your energy and attention as you give to the cares of this world. That really is the practice. Give that side of yourself at least as much attention as you give to the cares of this world. And you too will grow more and more into the likeness and image of Jesus Christ. You already are. You too will become a saint of the church. Thanks be to God.